Hello, and welcome to the first video of three that goes over your ACT score, what to do with your score, how to improve, and how to use that score to pick a list of colleges to pick from. My name is Patrick Choi. I'm the founder of Kill Standard. And thank you. So, in beginning to talk about the ACT score, it's important to talk about the breakdown of the score and where these numbers come from. The ACT score is comprised of 4 tests and an essay section. Each of the tests, the English, the math, the reading, and the science, you get a scaled score of 1 through 36, 1 being the lowest score, 36 being the highest score. And then you also have a separate essay score, which is from 2 to 12. Then we have the composite score, which is just the average of the scaled scores from your English, math, and reading and science scores. And the composite score is a score that colleges look at when determining your eligibility for admissions. So in receiving your ACT score this morning, I'm sure a lot of you guys are asking, especially if it's your first time, what's next? What can I do and how can I improve? In order for us to help you figure out how you can improve, we decided to use one of our former students as a case study. And this student actually received her test score this morning as well. So we're going to use her first score, first official score, before she started meeting with us, in a score today. On the left side, we have her first score, which was, I believe, from the October exam. And her composite score was a 23. Her score from today was a 31. And if we look at the breakdown, her English score, she scored a 24 on her first test, a 34 on her second test. On her math test, she scored a 24 on her first, and then 28 on the second. On the reading, she scored a 23. Today she scored a 30. And on the science, she scored a 22, and today she scored a 29. Of course, the essay isn't available just yet. They take a few weeks to release. So in identifying how much we can improve by, we need to look at the scaled score conversion chart to figure out our areas of opportunity. So for the English, if she scored a 24, what that means is that she answered 54 to 56 questions correct, 35 to 36 math questions correct, 25 to 26 reading questions correct, and 23 to 24 science questions correct. Now, it's important to note that as the test progressed, her scores dropped. And that generally happens to a lot of first-time test takers. When the longer they work, the more tired they get. And this is a stamina issue. And we're going to see how this stamina issue translates to the actual test itself. But before we do that, if, for example, she wanted to move her score up to a 30, for example, for her English score, she would need to answer 9 more questions correct. That's actually doable in a test with 75 questions. For the math, if she wanted to boost her score up to a 28, she would need to answer 11 more questions correct. For the science, to get a 30 or 29, she would need to answer 6 more questions correct. And for the science, she would need to answer about 9 more questions correct. Okay. So here we see a lot of areas of opportunity because the number of questions that she needs to answer correct isn't that large, nor is it too small. And I say not too small because if she scored a 35 and got 72 questions correct, getting that extra 1 more question right would be very hard because you're already going at full speed. Whereas right now, because her scores are so low, she has more room to wiggle. And with some content knowledge, as well as some strategy and a little pacing practice, it is very conceivable that she can answer 9 more questions correct for the English section, 11 more questions correct for the math, 6 more for the reading, and 9 more for the science. So we'd say that this student has a lot of opportunities to improve. So before we can jump in to using our strategies and working through for improvement, we have to see exactly where does she need help with. And when we break down our tutoring pedagogy, it really comes down to content, strategy, and pacing. So one of the things that we had her do was immediately take test 73E, which is the April of 2016 exam, which you guys can find online. And in doing so, we generated a score report for her. On the left side, you see the questions that she answered correctly, which is noted by a check mark. Questions that she answered incorrectly, which is noted by an X. And questions that she left blank. I know, you're not supposed to leave anything blank, but sometimes it happens. On the right side, we have what we call the deep dive, where we go in and try to find out which content-based questions she got wrong, which questions could she have answered using our strategies. And that way we can identify where she needs help. Now, if you'll notice, one of the glaring things that stick out here is this. In the end of the test, she hits a wall and starts getting a lot of questions wrong. This follows the trend of her test as a whole, as we saw in the previous slide. As she goes from the English to the math to the reading to the science, her scores are slowly starting to drop. So this is obviously the first thing is she needs to work on her stamina. So we know that we have to improve her testing ability by having her take a couple of tests, practice tests, to gain that strength. Another thing to note is these two little marks here. Here, she left 2 questions blank. Like I said, that's a no-no, sure. So from now on, we're going to reinforce the idea of not leaving anything blank. Now let's go into the deep dive. This is where we kind of figure out which tools to use to help her. And off the bat, it looks like she has a problem with commas, stop and go punctuation, half stop punctuations, and surprisingly, pronoun errors. So now we know that she needs help. She needs to review pronouns, comma uses, stop punctuations, and half stops within the sentence themselves. So it looks very likely that we're going to be able to find her the points that she needs in order to answer this question, to do well in this section. So when we think about the English section as a whole, the English test is broken down into 2 question types. We have the grammar and usage, and then the rhetorical. In the grammar and usage, you're asked or tasked with acting as a proofreader for the passage. And what that means is you look at the question, you look at the passage, and if you identify a grammar error, then you fix it and move on. The rhetorical questions are more of asking you to be an editor, whereas you read the passage and you try to make the passage flow better. Both are easy, but they require different strategies. And as we already saw, there are plenty of opportunities for her to just improve, just simply using the grammar and usage strategies that we have. Now, the next section is the math section. And most people will agree that the math section is the easiest to improve on. But is it? And remember, the math section on the ACT really tests you on algebra, algebra 2, and geometry with a little bit of trigonometry to start. So it should be relatively easy to improve on because we've all learned that stuff. I would imagine most sophomores would have no problems with the majority of these questions. So initially, we want to discuss the speed and accuracy portion. As we saw, she answered about 35 to 36 questions correct, and she attempted all 60 questions, which means that she only answered correctly a little bit more than half of the test. Someone who's answering only about half of the test correct should definitely not be trying to answer the entire test. Their job isn't to finish the test. Their job is to get the most amount of raw points possible. So one of the things that we decided to do with her, and one of the things I would suggest you guys considering, is actually doing less questions, but getting more of them correct. So without really getting into the content, which we got into after we got through this first portion, we asked her to only go for questions 1 through 45 and forget the last 15. forget it. Not because she can't do it, but because generally by the time she gets to the last 15, she's running low on time. She was speeding through the other 45 questions to get to question number 45. So then she's now made a lot of mistakes in the first 45 questions. And the last 15 are harder, so she's probably going to get the majority of them wrong. Why would we want to spend time on something that we're going to get wrong? So our goal was for her to slow things down, only answer 45 questions while working through them carefully and accurately. And what happened was she actually ended up getting 38 of the 45 questions right. Not bad. Still not happy, but it's better than nothing. And as you can see, 38 is higher than where she started from originally. So what about the last 15 questions? Well, we asked her to guess on the last 15 questions. Just pick a letter, go straight through. And surprisingly, she was able to get 45, 46 to 60. She was actually able to get 4 questions correct just by guessing, picking one letter and going straight through. And that actually gave her a total raw score of 42 points. Now, mind you, this is without doing any sort of content work or actual question strategy. This was a whole test-based strategy. We're going to get into question-based strategies on the next page, on the next video tomorrow. Okay? So by simply focusing on accuracy and speed, we were able to improve her score. Now, of course, this only takes you so far, but this is a good start. Then reading. And reading is arguably the hardest section to improve. And I say that it's the hardest because most students, actually, all of our students, know how to read. But the problem is that they can't get the questions correct. And the issue here is sometimes in the way the students read. Some students will read the entire passage, then go to the questions, and then go back to the passage, and then go to the questions, and go to the passage. Some students will read the part of the passage that they need in order to answer the question, but will completely forget. Some students will read the part of the passage necessary, go to the question, but then get pushed or get convinced by the wrong answer that that's the right answer. So there's many factors at play, and because it's something that we innately know how to do, not necessarily well, we make a lot of mistakes. And a lot of students come to us and tell us that they feel like on the reading section, there is no such thing as the right answer. And that's definitely not true. We employ strategies like process of elimination, where we cross off the word or phrase that makes that answer choice wrong. Prediction, predicting what the right answer should look like before you go into the answer choice. That way you're not convinced or you're swayed by other answer choices. Regardless of all this, the other factors that are important is speed, the pacing, and the strategy. So once we gave her the strategies and had her practice the strategies, then we started to focus on speed. So initially, we asked her to do a reading passage, one passage at a time, but set the timer so that when she finishes the passage, she can stop the clock and take note of how long it took her. So in the beginning, it took her about 13 minutes to answer each passage with only one question wrong. So she was using our strategies, but it was taking her a little bit longer, but she was getting less wrong. Then we transitioned from that into less time. So we started to whittle that time down to 12 minutes while maintaining that one question wrong margin. Then to 11 minutes, and so on. And one of the things that our tutors did was they would watch her work through the reading passage, and whenever they found her spending too much time or getting stuck on a question, the tutor prompted her to move on. And this was important because as she started to do this, she came to me one day and said, I hear Chloe, her tutor's voice in my head. And that's kind of what we wanted to get. It's a little creepy, but that's kind of the direction we wanted to go. So by doing this, she was actually able to lower the amount of time that she spent per passage while maintaining a high accuracy rate. Then the science. Now, it's no coincidence that the science section and the reading section, two of the arguably most difficult sections of the exam, are also at the end. Because as we saw in this student's score report, that her scores went down as she progressed through the exam. And a lot of students freak out when it comes to the science section. But really, it's not that bad. And I say it's not that bad because the science section is pretty much the reading section, except the science section has charts, tables, graphs, and figures. And the question tasks to ask us to interpret the data that they give us. So, like the reading section, we don't need to know everything that's going on. We just need to be able to find what we need to find, make the proper inferences, and then answer the questions using strong process of elimination. And like the reading section, our approach was speed, pacing, and strategy. We wanted her to time herself to see how long it took her to answer each passage correctly while minimizing her mistakes using our strategies. And then once we were able to come up with an average amount of time, we started to whittle that time back until she was able to finish the section while maintaining her accuracy. So then what does this all mean? What does my SAT score do as far as how to pick which colleges I should look at? And I've put together a list of colleges that a lot of our students in the past have applied to from Southern California. This is by no means an exhaustive list, but this is a pretty big list. So say that you have a score of a 32. Okay? So what a score of a 32 means, according to this chart, is, and when I compare myself to the Stanford applicant, 31 to 35 is the range, and 32 is within that range, which means that Stanford is not out of the game yet. But because my score, 32, is actually closer to the lower of the two numbers, it might still be hard to get in. I mean, Stanford is hard to get in anyway, but it's going to be harder when I compare myself to the rest of the applicants. And that's how you should look at this. The closer you are to the higher number, the closer your score is to the higher number, the more likelihood of you getting accepted into that school. So if we go to the bottom of the list, for example, a score of 32, well then, University of Washington, Colorado, San Diego State, Arizona State, these schools are all shoo-ins. As a matter of fact, I would probably start to use these as my safety schools, and schools that I know I'll get into. Okay? Now, if you scored a 27, but or you think you can get up to a 32, that's fine. Use that 32 as a way to gauge your numbers, but don't forget the safety schools. So when you're putting together a list, make sure you have a list of schools that are, dream schools, schools that are a long shot. You never know. And then schools that are safety schools, and then schools that are 50-50. And you can use that. You can do that by taking your estimated score improved score, and putting it up against these percentiles. So why does all this matter? Why does the ACT score matter so much? Well, the answer to that is that ACT scores help you receive merit-based awards. Now, I know when I talk to parents about merit-based awards, a lot of them discuss these scholarships as if they're this unicorn. Some have said, oh, you need to be extraordinary, like build a school in some country in Africa, or overcome some great trial in your life. Sure, being extraordinary is one of the surefire ways of getting a scholarship, but a lot of schools also offer merit-based scholarships where your grades and your ACT score correlate to a certain award amount. Here's a couple of schools. Here we have an actual email that one of my students received from the University of Arizona. And they laid it out pretty straightforward. On the top, we have the ACT scores. And on the left column, we have the GPA. And based on your ACT score and your GPA, you will receive that dollar amount. So this student had a GPA of, I think, a 3.6 and also scored a 32. So her annual scholarship would be $20,000. I don't know about you, but $20,000 is a lot of money. It's practically a car every year. So thank you for joining us today as we talk about how to estimate our improvements, how to put together a list of schools for us to look at in the spring, and to see how scholarship money is correlated or tied to my ACT score. Tomorrow, we're going to go over actual strategies for different types of questions that we find on the ACT. I'm also going to post a PDF file for you to download so that you can follow along with me. And these videos will be up for a while so that you can always refer back to them if necessary. If you have any questions, feel free to visit us at kyostandard.com or email at patrick@kyostandard.com. Thank you, and I'll see you tomorrow.